Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and if you're new here on my channel, I usually talk about Japanese movies, dramas, entertainment. Sometimes I tap into other Asian pop culture topics as well. And for today's video, we're going to be talking about a newly landed Japanese drama on Netflix titled Chastity High or Renai Battle Royale. And the reason why I added this on my queue is for no other reason than me being familiar with the main cast. So this stars Mikami Ai as Ichika Arizawa and Miyase Ryubi as Maki Ryogo. Now for I've seen her in the Yu Yu Hakusho live action among other projects, but that's the only one I can think of at the top of my head right now. And for Ryubi, I've seen him in Kimi no Hana ni Naru or I Will Be Your Bloom, also available on Netflix, and I think I've also made a review of that here on my channel, so there's that. Now for the format of these types of videos, again, if you're new here, I usually don't judge dramas and movies based off of if they're good or bad, but whether or not they're entertaining. So that's mostly like the vibe here. It's just chatting with a friend, talking about recommendations and all these other things, and just thoughts about these types of shows. And if you're into that, then please keep on watching. Before we dive into, the actual plot of the show, let me just start off by saying that I think one of the reasons why I found this series entertaining is it reminded me of when I was in school. I studied in a Catholic school back when I was in high school. And so a lot of these kind of things resonated with me a lot, and it's quite interesting in that manner, but I'll be discussing more of that later into the video. But just to give you a perspective as to why I actually sat down and started making a video about this. But let's jump into the plot of the series. So basically it starts off with Asuran Academy. It's a former all-girls school, but because of a lot of different factors, mostly because of financial restraints caused by the aging population in Japan, they decided to merge with an all-boys school. So the school became a co-ed. Now with that, so obviously a lot of the female students, they really don't know how it is to act around boys in school, and with the boys obviously they get more excited meeting more female students and all that. But the problem is the school imposed a no romance policy between the students, and it's not just within the school, but basically as long as you're a student, no romance doesn't just apply to students. But if you're a student and you're caught dating someone someone else not even studying from the same school, that's also part of the violation. If you're proven to have gone all the way very, very intimately with someone else, then therefore you'll be expelled. So that's the entire vibe of that's where the series starts off of. Now with that, how it is with teenagers and puberty, and the more that you restrain them, the more likely that they're going to do these types of things. And there's obviously a lot of restraint immediately before everything started blowing up, or before we actually dive into the actual premise of the series. Now for our two characters, so there's Ichika, who is the main character of the series. She doesn't come from a well-off family, while most of the school comes from very elite families. Her and her best friend Emma, they have their entire life planned out, having these goals of how using this school as kind of a stepping stone into getting a better life. And what I like about this is they didn't go in it in a sense that Ichika is treated differently because of her background. So there's really not a lot of that here as compared to, say, other works like Hanayori Dango, that entire format of poor girl in a rich school type of thing. It's not really like that at all, but it's rather, her being so focused on these types of goals and what this academy can do for her and her future. And then on the other side, so there's Maki, who is the son of the governor who donates to this school. He has an older brother that he also has a lot of like issues with, etc., etc. But he's kind of like in his rebellious phase because his father is a little bit of, is not really a little bit, but very abusive when it comes to him and his mother and all these other things. And so they're coming from two different backgrounds, but a year before the merger happened, they met at the hospital, and that's like their first interaction. And it was kind of like implied that immediately, even in that short interaction, Ichika was kind of like attracted to Maki because he is posed as this kind of like really nice, but at the same time this popular kind of kid, like the cool guy, you know, that everyone kind of like just falls for, all these other things. Anyways, so with all of the things happening in the school, the romances and all these other things, Maki is trying to get himself expelled from the school. And Ichika caught him with another girl, but because he's familiar with the girl and Maki, she kind of like diverts the teacher's attention so that they weren't caught. And then the girl that Maki was making out with kind of like offered money to Ichika just to tell her to keep the secret. And it's not done out of malice or anything like that. Like this girl, Koharu, she's actually pretty nice. She's just a bit naive in a sense as well, but she's just your like she's just kind of like flighty in a sense as well. Like when she offered the money, it wasn't meant to offend Ichika at all. It was just kind of like, hey, if you want, you know, I can give you money, just be hush hush about it. She's very nonchalant about the situation. And at first, obviously, Ichika was hurt because she took it as, you know, this person is bribing her because of her background and any other things. But because of her own financial problems, like her and her mom is being harassed by loan sharks because of a debt that her father wasn't paying, she ended up going back to Koharu and asking her for money, and she gave it to her openly, all of these other things, and then it initially ended at that. But afterwards, eventually along the story, Ichika gets this idea of creating this account called Love Keeper. And what she basically does is she takes some leaks that are being reported to the school, and she uses that to kind of like talk through the students that are featured and telling them that she wouldn't expose them, or she would take care of the leak if they pay her 200,000 yen. The one that triggered that entire thing was when her best friend was also reported and expelled from the school. And obviously, like, they have their goals in mind, but her being expelled and all that means that their plans are derailed to be successful together. And that kind of like triggers her to do this, because she thinks that, you know, these students, they really don't need the money that much. Like, they can easily just spend it on any other thing, whereas for her, this amount is already a big deal, and it can help her and her family and her situation and her paying her tuition and all these other things. And she dives into that. Now, I wouldn't spoil like the rest of the story, but basically, so Ichika plays this Love Keeper, and we kind of like dive into, like, as the episodes go along, we kind of like explore these different relationships happening and learn more about like these kids. And it's not just about, like, obviously some of them, they're driven by, you know, like hormones and just being attracted to someone, because that's just how it is when you're at that age. And I think part of human nature is just being attracted to someone. But Ichika also learns like these different takes on relationships. Like, there's this one situation where a girl was taken advantage of because of her coming from an elite school. Another one, and I think the most significant storylines as well, is they focused on LGBT students as well. And obviously they could have treated it with a lot more depth, a lot more anything, but with 8 episodes, I think they still somehow did a good job in terms of exploring or fleshing out these characters. And it's not just one character, but a couple of characters, with one trying to navigate how she's in love with her best friend, but her best friend is straight, so the best friend rejected her, and they kind of like drifted apart because of her feelings. And because of that, she poured herself into this entire witch hunt of reporting other students. But it doesn't really antagonize her character. It really shows how much she's projecting her feelings, or the way that she's hurt by doing this other thing. But in no way was she portrayed as this kind of like evil person doing this because like she was rejected. It wasn't really like that at all. It was these types of sensitivities that people at a young age trying to navigate their own sexuality, gender identity, kind of like go through. And it was portrayed in that manner in this series. Again, not in too much depth that someone can expect from an 8-episode series, but it's there. And then there are also characters where one of the characters, he's very open in kind of like exploring this relationship with a fellow male student, but that other student, he as much as, you know, he accepts that he is attracted to guys as well, but he's not ready to come out yet. But for some reason, like with this situation, he was outed, and it caused a lot of like these conflicts and issues, not just between him, but also like his relationship with this other person and how this other person is taking it. So again, and like these types of stories, I think, is very handled nicely by the series in a sense. But there's also this one character, Kanda, who his idea of relationships is very much affected off of like the influence of what happened in his family, his strain with his mother, and the way that he looks at relationships in a complex manner, because that's what he absorbed as a child. And again, I think with 8 episodes, they could have fleshed out these stories a lot more, but just tapping into these things in a manner that is very not really chaotic, but in a sense that even the characters themselves are confused as to how they navigate their feelings, is very much representative of how it is being a teenager trying to explore romance and your own, not just romance, but who you are as a person. But I think there are some aspects, however, of this series that I personally didn't enjoy. Like, for example, there are characters where one of the characters got involved with a way older guy, and they're in high school, so obviously she's a minor, and that there's just a lot of like I wish there's a lot more repercussions for that other character and what happened to her. But I feel like that storyline was kind of like just used as a plot device for some of the subplots of the story. I didn't really like that, because obviously he should have gone to jail for that. But again, because of so many different stories happening, I feel like they took this kind of like quote unquote safe route when it comes to that story. But I really hope that they kind of like work something out a lot better for that. Another thing is they kind of like paralleled that with another situation where a younger male student was showing interest in the counselor, the teacher. But you know, I think that kind of like double standard treatment as well when it comes to these stories. Nothing happened between those two characters as compared to the ones that I earlier mentioned. But again, like these types of things and treatment when it comes to those kinds of relationships, that are definitely a lot more, I wouldn't even say just problematic, but criminal. I hope that would have been handled a lot better. But aside from those quirks, again, like it is obviously, like, to me, the entire flow, it reminded me so much of Gossip Girl with the leaks and kind of like these kind of like extortions and all these other stuff. It is entertaining in a sense, and again, the reason why I mentioned why it reminded me of my school days is because I came from a Catholic school back when I was in high school. And there are, like, there's not a no romance rule per se, but there are definitely a lot of like intriguing stuff that happened because we're a Catholic school, because of the restrictions per se. I didn't get to experience prom because at the time, and I don't know if this is my brain kind of like making up that information because it's been so long or it's an actual thing, but I think I remember that one of the reasons why we didn't have prom is because they're preventing people from doing stuff because of prom. And yeah, we didn't have prom. We had a graduation ball that me and my friends didn't attend to. We just hung out. But that, like, even that ball, people were like, teachers were present, even if it was organized a little bit independently by some of the students. So teachers were still required to attend that particular gathering because, again, Catholic school, they're preventing things from happening. So yeah, so it kind of like just reminded me of that. But again, is this something worth watching? I think it's very dependent on type of viewer. I found it really entertaining despite, again, some of the arcs that didn't sit well with me. But I'm pretty much used to these kind of like out of field type of stories, and this is one of kind of like the more quote unquote normal Japanese series out there that I've seen as well. So I don't know, like if you're just looking for something intriguing, something that has a little bit of like twists and turns to it, but something that also kind of explores the complexity of, say, relationships and views, especially when it comes to teenagers, not just teenagers, but even like adults and our treatment of you know, intimacy and all these other things, then you might find this series something worth watching. And yeah, but there are a lot of like heartfelt moments in this one that even adults can probably like take something away from. And there's also stuff about friendship and all these other things. And I think what I like the most about this is everyone, like each of the characters, while it doesn't really justify what they do, they are given kind of like each of their justifications as to why they are the way they are. And that applies not just for the good characters, but also for the ones who did horrible stuff here, aside from, you know, certain characters. But I think in some sense, like there are some subplots that I feel like could have been explored a lot more. They could have extended it to 10 episodes to really kind of like flesh out all those other subplots that I feel like weren't tied up nicely, especially for the adults. Like for the adults, I feel like there are some parts of their story that was significantly in there but weren't really tapped into as much. And so there are kind of like loose ends here and there for those types of stories, like for example for Maki's parents and all these other things. Like I wished, but in a sense as well, I think that when it comes to these TV shows, at least my perception of it is the focus is the kids, and that these adults, you know, their own story is kind of like their own thing. And that in reality, some of these things don't really get resolved all in that well. But obviously, like if you're watching something fictional, then you hope that some of the loose ends are tied in some way. But yeah, I think for the story of the kids, it's kind of like tied up a little bit better. But for the adults, like there's definitely a lot there that we're like, why is that even there in the first place? There's not a lot of like closure in some of those parts. But yeah, so again, it's not the perfect watch. There are a lot of like parts of it that, you know, are kind of like questionable and all these things, but overall it is intriguing and entertaining enough to sit through episodes 1 up to the end. So if you're looking for something to check out on Netflix soon, then this is something that I recommend. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one. Bye!